what is one thing that they can do today or this week to get the ball moving on making these changes in their program?
I'd say the number one thing that they can do is to sit down and think about exactly what type of culture they want to have on their team. So, and list out kind of, 5 key components of their culture and communicate those to their team. Have that conversation. Again, this is not necessarily a conversation about sexual orientation. This is a conversation about the culture of a team and what we are going to stand for. What are we all about? And when I say stand for, not what we're going to put up with, but who are we? And this is the perfect time. It's summer. This is the time when we're, looking at our coaching philosophies and saying, okay, what are we going to do next year? How are we going to do it? What are our goals? And make that one of your goals right now, today, to sit down and say, okay, how am I going to create an inclusive culture? And I'm going to have this conversation with my athletes first thing in the season. If you need an excuse, say you recently listened to a webcast, a podcast on, diversity or sexual orientation and got you thinking, we need to think about how, we're going to be an inclusive culture on our team. And, use that as your excuse and do that today and make a commitment to this season have that conversation first thing with your athletes.
Now, what if coaches think they don't have any gay athletes on their team?
Well, that's that's always the trick, right? So this is a conversation you want to have whether you have homosexual or bisexual athletes on your team, no matter what. As I said, it's not just a sexuality issue. This has to do with lots of different aspects of people's identities. And the one thing I would also say is that a lot of coaches will tell me and athletes will tell me that they don't have, gay athletes on their teams or gay teammates. And, if you look at the statistics, gay athletes are represented in every sport, in every division, in every state, and university across the United States. So even if you don't think you have any gay athletes, more than likely you have had or currently have some on your team. And, from what I've heard from gay athletes is that they really appreciate that I encourage coaches to have these conversations, because as hard as it is to have them, it's much better in the long run for both team dynamics and personal success and fulfillment.
And how can they, you kind of mentioned this earlier, saying that they listen to the podcast, but how can they really make sure that this doesn't scare, someone maybe that's in the closet or sort of set off alarms on their team? How can they do it in a way that it's sort of just about the culture?
Yeah, and that's why I say using a podcast, or saying that you've done some reading on diversity and inclusion. I think it's fair to use the word diversity and inclusion rather than picking out one specific aspect, because that's true. You might have someone on your team and they might be concerned that, oh my gosh, did someone notice something about me? Or, they might be concerned that they've recently come out and this is why the coach is doing it now. Everyone's looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to avoid that. So, whenever I do a workshop, I tease my participants and I say, just tell your athletes, you were forced to come to a diversity and inclusion workshop,
Yeah.
and it got you thinking. And that I think that's a fine, segue just to say, you recently were scanning websites, you recently listened to a podcast on diversity and inclusion, and it was talking about how to create inclusive cultures, despite different genders, races, sexual orientations, cultures, and couch all of it within all those different aspects. Because really the goal isn't just, inclusion in terms of sexual orientation. It's inclusion for all.
Yeah.
So I think that's an easy way to set it up without making any one person feel kind of targeted or anxious. And one thing I will say related to that, and I want to give coaches a heads up, is that sometimes no matter how inclusive an environment you set up, you're that doesn't mean that you're going to have a student athlete come out. I have had coaches who said that they suspect or have been told by other players, or good friends that of a player that the player is gay, and they work so hard and tirelessly to set up an inclusive culture, and the athlete never comes out during their time at the university, and they say, I must have failed in some way.
Mm-hmm.
The coming out process, as I said earlier, is very complex, and even if you do the best you can, that doesn't necessarily mean someone's going to feel comfortable coming out, and it may have nothing to do with you. I mean, because they don't just exist on your team, they exist on a campus, in a community, their own personal families as well as their team families. So there's a lot that goes into it. Well, all we can do is do our best to set up inclusive cultures and make sure that everyone feels safe and valued and heard, and then we just go from there.